I'm Allan Scott. I've been in business 35 years. I've sold or been involved in 9 exits. I've started 11 companies and 1 fiasco company. I've run 7-figure solo business with no staff, and I've distilled everything I've learned from those experiences in 3 decades of building businesses into lessons that truly matter for achieving a new life, a rich life. Before we get started, let me tell you about our headline sponsor for this season. It's pitchcapital.com. And honestly, it's something I wish had existed 20 years ago. Look, I've raised capital. I've raised $1 million in 5 days, and I raised $2.1 million through a podcast. I've been on both sides of the table. I recently invested in a company. In fact, 2. The fundraising process is brutal. It's 6 to 12 months of your life grinding through decks, emails, rejections, and meetings that go nowhere. And all you can do is focus on that as opposed to speaking to customers and working on your product or service or working out. Some things I really enjoy. Pitchcapital.com is the world's first AI fundraising platform that automates your entire capital raising journey. You simply upload your business details, and in 90 seconds, you've got an investor-ready pitch deck and financial model. Their AI then matches you with the right investors, whether that's pre-seed all the way to Series C+. It handles the outreach, it books the meetings, and you can even close deals through their secure escrow system. They're compressing that 6 to 12 month nightmare into something that actually works, something that's actually efficient. So if you're raising capital or starting a business and want to create a pitch deck and test your sanity, check them out, www.pitchcapital.com. Now let me tell you about the worst day of my business life. Episode 3, The Betrayal That Built an Empire. Walt Disney's $175,000 lesson. What if the worst thing that actually ever happened to you was the blueprint for everything you'd build afterwards? Walt Disney. That's why I'm dressed as a farmer. Walt Disney once told an interviewer, "I learned that you have to control what you have, or it'll be taken from you." The statement sounds paranoid. It's also the foundation for the most powerful entertainment empire in human history. I've actually been to a bunch of Disney lands. I just recently, in fact, a couple of weeks ago, I was in Tokyo, and I went to Disneyland in Tokyo. Incredible. And I'm taken by this man. So you'll notice that there's an entire plan for this show. If you follow me on socials, Allan Scott, on everything, I explain what the plan of this is. It's to give you all the knowledge I've got. Everything. Every single thing. That includes all the books that have changed my life, which is what this is about. Season 1, Founders, the founders that changed the world, and the lessons I've learned from them. Season 2 is talking to funders, the people that pay a lot of the time, 90% of the time, as you will see, or 99% of the time, to allow for these founders to move forward with their dreams, with their missions, with their messages, with their visions, and with their voices. This is important because this man has defined so much of the world that we currently live in. And I'm trying to do that. You know, we've looked at Ford's obsession with control. We've looked with Edison's need for autonomy. And today we're looking at something every founder faces: betrayal. And we're not going to look at the sanitized business school version. This is the real deal. The kind that changes how you build everything that comes afterwards. And this is from a man who's had 3 divorces. I know a thing or two about this world. Today I'm pulling from Walt Disney, The Triumph of the American Imagination, a book by Neil Gabler. It's an 800-page biography that reveals not the sanitized Disney mythology, but the obsessive, controlling, brilliant man behind it all. This is a story of a 26-year-old cartoonist who traveled to New York expecting a raise and returned to Los Angeles with nada, naught, nothing. No character, no contract, no staff, no plan. A train ride, a sketchbook, and a conviction that he would never again let anyone control his work. Never be a boss, never have a boss, my personal mantra. Because sometimes the only thing more dangerous than being betrayed is never learning the lesson that was meant for you. Act 1, the spark that changed everything. The meeting that meant nothing. It was February 1928. Walt Disney boards a train from Los Angeles to New York with his wife, Lillian. It's their second honeymoon. He's carrying 2 Oswald the Lucky Rabbit prints under one arm and a book of press clippings under the other. He's just 26. His cartoons are successful. The film daily just called Oswald one of the bestsellers of the short subject program. In other words, it's a bestseller in cartoons at the time. Short cartoons, very short cartoons. Walt is confident. He's more than confident. He's cocky. He's going to negotiate an increase from $2,250 per film that he's currently making to $2,500 per film. He has no idea that his distributor, Charles Mintz, has already signed a new 3-year deal with Universal without him. He has no idea that Mintz has been secretly meeting with Walt's animators, signing them to contracts behind his back. He has no idea that his business partner thinks he's superfluous, he's useless, he doesn't need Walt Disney, since Walt did not even draw anything himself. Mintz's words, not mine. The train arrives in New York to a bitterly cold reception. Walt visits MGM first, hoping for a competitive bid. The executive tells him cartoons are on the wane, they're on the down, and he says, there's the door. Then Walt heads to Mintz's office. Mintz doesn't offer an increase. He offers a decrease. He says, how about this? How about I pay you $1,800 per film? Huh? How about that, guy? 50-50 profit split. And that's it. Suggesting Walt isn't a studio owner, but a subcontractor. Walt's stunned. His contacts, his old mentor, he contacts his old mentor, my brain. The mentor tells him to keep negotiating, but hedges bets. Walt frantically wires his brother Roy. Roy, draw up an ironclad year-long contract for the staff, all the contracts with me personally, my signature necessary. I'll do it all. I'll do everything, but get the contract to me as soon as possible. He wants to lock down his team before Mintz can go in and steal his team that are making these short daily cartoons that are doing so well. Roy wires back. The staff refuse to sign Walt. That's when Walt realizes the truth. Jobs for animators are scarce. His employees should have jumped at guaranteed contracts, and they did. The only reason they'd ever refused if they already had a better offer. And they did. From Mintz. Mintz made them all better offers. These are salarymen, not businessmen. If you listen to these shows, you'll learn the difference pretty quick. I call this next part the Saturday Morning Massacre. It's Saturday morning in Mintz's office, and he gets the final offer. $1,800 a picture, 50% of profits, and one more thing. Mintz takes over the Disney organization. Walt, you and your brother Roy each get $200 and $200 a week, and you're my employees. Walt Disney, who created Oswald, who built the studio, who managed production, who did everything, has been offered $200 a week to work for the man who just distributed the damn cartoons. Why would Mintz think Walt would accept this deal? Because Mintz owned the rights to Oswald. Walt had created the character, but in his contract with the distributor, he granted Mintz all the rights. Walt had no legal frickin' footing. He had no ownership. He had no leverage. If you listen to the show, you will hear me talk about ownership. You will hear me talk about leverage. These two things can change your life in a way that few things can. Mintz had done the math. Walt can't draw. The animators do the frickin' work. Walt is replaceable. Walt refuses. Big surprise, right? Walt refuses and Walt walks out. Walt is not shocked. But Walt goes to Universal. He says, talk to Mintz. They don't. He wires Roy and he says, please give me $100 for expenses. He returns to his hotel where Lillian later says he acted fuming, angry. He was out of a job. And at the same time, he was glad because he would never, ever, ever, ever again work for anyone. Never be a boss, never have a boss. March 13th, 1928, he had nothing. Walt leaves New York. No character, no contract, no staff, except for a few loyalists like UB Earworks. No plan, and most importantly, no cartoon land to provide a haven from the real world. He would talk about this betrayal for the rest of his life, not with bitterness, but as a parable. You have to be careful with whom you trust. You have to control what you have, or it'll be taken from you. I've never seen how duplicitous the business world could be until that point. I learned these lessons, and I would never forget them, said Walt Disney. But as the train pulled out of New York, Walt Disney had one terrifying thought. He'd have to start again, from scratch. The train ride that changed everything. Somewhere between New York and Los Angeles, Disney started drawing. A mouse, round ears, white gloves, short pants. By the time the train arrived in Los Angeles, Mickey Mouse was birthed. He existed. He was created. Not because Walt was trying to salvage his career, not because he was executing a strategic pivot plan, but because the work itself, the act of creating, was the only response he knew to catastrophe. Years later, the famous animator Ward Kimball said, he was so self-absorbed, so fully within his own mind and ideas that he emerged only to share them and to have them acted upon, to be executed, to be created. That train ride revealed something crucial. Walt Disney wasn't in the cartoon business. He was in the control business. And cartoons were just the medium through which he could exercise that control. The Mince Betrayal, it did more than anything. It taught Disney to be more careful with contracts. It taught him that partial ownership is complete vulnerability. When I was 25, when I was 25, 26, somewhere between 25 and 27, or 23, I have no idea. I think 23. In my 20s, in my early 20s, I started a company. My first company was called The Source House. We sourced anything you needed. That then developed into something called OPM, Other People's Money, where I realized a better business model than sourcing whatever you need and going to find it and then charging you. Because sometimes you'd say, I need this. It'd take me forever to get it. I'd get it. I'd bring it to you. And then you'd say, oh, I don't need it anymore. And then I've done all this work for nothing. I realized the real answer was to get the money from you first, then go do the thing you needed me to do, and then deliver it, right? Other people's money. And I did printed promotional clothing. And I managed to get a deal with the biggest distributor at the time. It was a shopping channel group called ShopRite Checkers. If you're from South Africa, you will have known this particular company. And I created a red t-shirt with a yellow smiley face on it to remind the staff to smile at everyone and to remind everyone to smile at the staff. ShopRite Checkers, smiley face, red t-shirt, yellow sticker. Basic math. I would charge $5 a t-shirt. It would cost me $1 for the t-shirt and 50 cents for the print. That's a $3.50 profit. I did not count for delivery of these particular items because I assumed they would just collect them from my print house, which, by the way, incidentally, was called Print House in Cape Town, South Africa. I did not read the contract. All I saw were the numbers, $100,000 a month. I was a millionaire, my first company. I immediately, or kind of immediately, within a period of time, very shortly after finding this out, got an amazing flat on Beach 3, I think it's Beach 3, of Clifton, Cape Town. St. Mungo, if those want to go and retrace it. Right on the beach, like right on the sand. A couple of bad things happened. Let's not get into it, but long story short, my t-shirts didn't arrive. There was a problem with the shipping. I went back to ShopRite. I said, I need another 30 days. They said, not a problem. So 60 days later, I delivered the t-shirts. I was so impressed with myself. Here comes the money. And then ShopRite Checkers showed me a clause that said 190 days after delivery is when you get paid. 190 days after delivery, not after order, delivery. So that was 60 plus 190. That was 250 days later I was going to get paid for stuff I had to pay up front for. This was the opposite of OPM. This was not my plan. I was poor. I was young. I didn't know anyone. I didn't know anything. I went to a loan shark to borrow the money to keep running my business. And it didn't take long with something called a VIG or an interest on the money you loan, 10% a week, to pretty much get rid of my entire business, to sell it, inverted commas, for those that are listening and can't watch or do not have any opportunity to watch because of any sort of sight problems. I sold my first company for $1. I was not careful with contracts. It also told me the problems with ownership. It told me the problems with money. It taught me so many lessons, much like Walt Disney. From that point forward, Disney would destroy partnerships. He would alienate investors and he would restructure entire industries, all to ensure that no one ever could take his work from him again. It's just powerful. This is why I chose this for episode 3. Act 2. The pattern that destroys. Here's what I've learned from 9 exits, 1 spectacular failure. By the way, OPM is that spectacular failure. That's my fiasco. The qualities that enable extraordinary achievement can become prisons of their own making. You see, Ford needed to democratize transportation. Edison needed autonomy, freedom. He needed to invent freely. And Disney needed to control to protect himself from the world's duplicity, from its two-facedness. This wasn't a strategy. My girlfriend would say this is trauma response turned into systematic excellence. Let's talk about my girlfriend. Let's talk about a partner. Let's talk about the partner who saved him. The partner who, like my partner, saved him by fighting him. After the Mint's betrayal, Disney had one asset. UB Eworks, I mentioned him earlier. He was the animator who'd refused Mint's offer. He refused to jump ship. Eworks couldn't manage a business, however. And Disney, he couldn't draw. Not really. But together, they created Mickey Mouse, and they launched a brand new studio. Disney's other asset, as you might have picked up by now, was his brother Roy. Where Walt was creative and impulsive, Roy was financial, methodical. Walt once admitted, I could not have managed a small grocery store. By the way, this keeps coming up, which is really weird. And Roy could not have assembled a child's kiddie car. Yet together, we built an organization that astounded the world. This is almost exactly what Henry Ford said. Isn't that weird? And what Edison said. This came up 3 times in 3 different books. But here's the crucial difference between Disney's partnership and those of Ford or Edison. Disney's partnership worked because they had clear hierarchical control. Roy handled money, Walt controlled creative, no overlap, no ambiguity, no surprises. When a business partner named Pat Powers tried to betray Disney years later, poaching Eworks and demanding control, Disney walked away. Again, he lost Eworks, he lost distribution, and he started over. As someone, myself, who started over businesses again and again and again, multiple times, too many times, if I'm completely honest, I turned to these books to find inspiration, to find a reminder that it was okay, that it happened to greater people than me, and they did okay, and to worse people than me. And by worse, I just mean worse off. But there's a pattern. The pattern is consistent. And the pattern in this case is very consistent. Anyone who threatened Disney's control faced the same fate. Instant severance. No negotiation. No compromise. I love this. The $8,300 house that would kill his mother. November 1938. Disney is at the peak of his powers. Snow White has just become the highest grossing film in recorded history. $6.7 million in receipts, 49 countries, 10 languages. Walt and Roy, they buy their parents a house in North Hollywood for $8,300. Interestingly enough, I bought my apartment for my father for £10,000. Brand new. Mine was second hand. There's 3 bedrooms, 2 baths. Mine was 1 bathroom, 1 bedroom. 2 bedrooms, sorry. A good heating system, a central gas heater with 4 circulators. They were so proud. Their mother Flora moved in and immediately noticed the heater malfunctioning. We have to fix the furnace, she said. Or else some morning we'll wake up and find ourselves dead. They laughed. Walt dispatched a workman from the studio to repair it. On the morning of November 26th, Flora goes into the bathroom and never returns. Her husband, Elias, finds her collapsed. He staggers into the hallway and he faints. The housekeeper discovers them both and drags them outside. Elias comes back. Flora does not. Carbon monoxide poisoning. A lid on the air intake had slipped, recirculating exhaust back into the house. A report ordered by Roy determined that the installation of the furnace showed either a complete lack of knowledge of the requirements of the furnace or a complete disregard of the conditions of what needed to be done. if they were known. Walt's workmen, Walt's house, Walt's mother. Later on, one animator would say, "You should have seen those two brothers at the funeral. In the following months, they regularly visited their mother's grave. Walt never spoke of her death to anyone thereafter." Years later, many, many years later, when his daughter Sharon asked where her grandparents were buried, Walt snapped, "I don't want to talk about it." I often wonder if this is why so many people die in the Disney films. This is the hidden cost of Disney's control obsession. He controlled the studio, he controlled production, he controlled quality, he even controlled the workmen who would install his mother's furnace. But control doesn't eliminate tragedy. It just makes you responsible for it. The strike that broke him. It was May 1941, and Disney's studio had grown from 300 employees to 1,600, and Walt has built exactly what he wanted, a creative paradise where he controls every single detail. Then his animators strike. Not over money, over control. They want union representation. They want creative input. They want respect. They're tired of Walt's constant interference, his late-night changes, his insistence that every frame matches his vision. The strike lasts over a year. When it's finally resolved, the studio drops from 1,500 employees to 600. Walt credits the strike with destroying the studio. Animator Mark Davies says, "When the studio began to become really something, a few of those men weren't growing to the same degree that the studio was. So pretty soon, our associations were mostly with people away from the studio, and Walt's private life became divorced from the studio. And many of these men could never understand that Walt had outgrown them, that he, Walt, had changed from the man that had hired them to the man that he was becoming. And the real issue wasn't that Disney had outgrown his employees. It's that his need for control had outgrown his capacity to maintain it." Listen, what do we know? You can control a 300-person studio through force of personality and obsessive attention to detail, but you cannot control a 1,600-person studio that way. The math don't math. Disney's response? He just stopped coming to the studio. For years, employees complained they couldn't get him to sign off on a project. He was just never around. His heart just wasn't in it anymore. So where was he? Building model trains in his backyard? Full-scale, operational trains? For 2 years, trains consumed Walt Disney completely. And by the way, this is the most bizarre section of his biography. The man who built an animation empire spent years obsessing over miniature locomotives. But at the same time, it makes perfect sense. Disney could control every aspect of a model train. The track layout, the engine performance, the scenery. It was a closed loop with no employees to strike, no partners to betray him, no studios to grow beyond his grasp. That's when he had an idea. What if I built an amusement park? Act 3. What this means for you. Disney's final act, Disneyland, reveals something profound about control. It's not about domination. It's about creating environments where excellence can't be compromised. Excellence can't be compromised. So what's the first lesson? Learn the right lesson from betrayal. The minced betrayal could have taught Disney to be paranoid, litigious, risk-averse, lawyered up. Instead, it taught him to own what truly matters. After Mince, Disney never created a character he didn't own again. He built systematic control into every single contract, every single partnership, every single deal. And here's the part you need to highlight. Disney didn't stop working with people. He didn't retreat into isolation. He simply built partnerships with clear control boundaries. Roy would go on to control finance. Walt would go on to control creative. When those boundaries were respected, the partnership thrived for decades. When anyone crossed them, the partnership ended immediately. What's the right lesson from your betrayal? Not never trust anyone, but own what matters and make your boundaries crystal clear. Most founders make Disney's early mistake. They trade ownership for capital, partnership for growth, control for momentum. And they're shocked when someone takes what they've built. The question isn't whether you'll face betrayal. Trust me, you will. It's whether you'll learn to prevent it systematically, whether you'll build in systems to protect you and what you've created. The second, distinguish between control and micromanagement. Disney's genius at Disneyland wasn't controlling every detail. It was creating systems that ensured quality without requiring constant presence. Sarah Blakely, by the way, is a great story on this, and we'll get into that further in future episodes. When they were building Disneyland, Disney walked into the construction site in a straw hat and loud sports shirt, ordering workers about, alternatively, hurrying them up and slowing them down. He was ordering them left, right, and center. He wasn't micromanaging, he said. He was teaching. Animator Ward Kimball, he said, this was actually a direct quote, he walked over every inch of Disneyland, telling them how to move a fence a little more to the left, because you couldn't see the boat as it came around the corner. Disney understood something most control freaks miss. The goal isn't to make every decision. It's to create an environment where decisions align with your vision without requiring your approval. At the studio, this broke down because Disney couldn't scale his vision to 1,600 staff members. But at Disneyland, it worked because the physical environment itself embodied his standards. A landscaper remembers Disney saying, "I need a jungle, or a touch of alpine, a flavor of the ski ride." He didn't know which trees would work, but he knew what he wanted. That's the difference. Disney didn't specify which trees. He specified the outcome. A jungle. Then he hired people who would execute against and within those parameters, against his dream, or for his dream, and within the parameters of what he needed. Where in your business are you micromanaging decisions instead of just setting standards? Where are you specifying trees instead of saying, actually, I just want a jungle? Third act. Accept the control has a cost. Disney's obsessive control created Snow White, Mickey Mouse, and Disneyland, amongst many other things. It destroyed his friendships, it alienated his employees, and it left him isolated. His wife Lillian, who we've mentioned before, described him as someone who had too much to do. He had to have a clear mind for work the very next day. When asked to name Walt's closest friend, she couldn't think of a single person. Animator Ward Kimball, probably Disney's closest friend, at least from all my records, said Walt was a hard guy to get close to. He was a workaholic. His career was his whole life. I think it was as good as a friend as he ever had. Disney himself seemed to recognize this. He told one prospective ranch seller, "My duty at the studio has left me little time for actual recreation." And the biographer's most devastating line? He was so self-absorbed, so fully within his own mind and ideas, that he emerged only to share them and to have them executed. This is the bargain that Disney made. Total control in exchange for total isolation. Was it worth it? Not for us to judge. But it is for us to recognize. Every founder faces this trade-off. The question isn't whether you'll pay a price for control. It's whether you'll pay it knowingly, with your eyes open, knowing exactly what it is you're giving up to get it. So, this episode, as all episodes, come with a challenge. I want you to identify one partnership or relationship where control boundaries are unclear. And let me say right now, I'm in the best relationship of my life, and it's purely because boundaries are very clear. I want you to ask yourself 3 questions. What do I actually need to control to ensure quality? Not what I want to control, what I need to control. What am I controlling out of trauma rather than strategy? What am I holding on to because I'm afraid of being betrayed again? And again, as someone coming out of 3 divorces, this is a question I asked myself a lot before getting into another relationship. Where am I confusing ownership with involvement? Where am I micromanaging instead of setting standards? A mistake I learned in my last agency before I sold it. Then have the hard conversations. Set clear boundaries. Define who controls what. Make it explicit, formal, documented, obvious. Disney's tragedy wasn't the mince betrayal. It was spending the next 38 years, 38 years, letting that betrayal dictate every relationship he formed. Don't make the same mistake. Learn the right lesson, one that matters. Set clear boundaries and build systems that protect quality without requiring your constant intervention. That's it. Thank you for listening. I'm Jason Allan Scott. This is the Jason Allan Scott Show. December 15th, 1966, Walt Disney dies at age 65 of lung cancer. He'd smoked since his days in the Red Cross in France. Chain smoking, nervously smoking, fingers stained with nicotine, the smell everywhere. His daughter Diane said, I just can't picture him without a cigarette. In his final days, even as he was dying, Disney lay in his hospital bed, tracing his plans for Epcot Center with his fingers, using the ceiling tiles as a grid. His brother Roy sat beside him, massaging his feet, saying, well, kid, this is the end, I guess. A nurse who cared for Disney in those final days wrote to the family, I just want you to know that poor man was so fearful. He was so scared. Fearful of what? Death? Or of losing control? One final time. And here's what I find remarkable. Disney didn't spend 38 years building systemic control into everything he created, characters he owned, studios he controlled, parks he designed, down to the placement of individual trees and the feeling you should get. He did it all for control. But in the end, he couldn't control the one thing that mattered most. The mince betrayal taught Disney that you'll have to control what you have or it'll be taken from you. And the deeper lesson that he learned, or perhaps the lesson that he never learned, is that control is a tool, not a destination. Ford used control to democratize transportation. Edison used autonomy to invent freely. And Disney used control to protect himself from betrayal. Isn't that mad? Only one of these serves something larger. Only one of these serves something larger than fear itself. What are you controlling? And more importantly, why? That's my questions to you today. Next time on the Jason Allan Scott Show, we'll explore a founder who mastered control not by demanding it, but by making it unnecessary. Until then, set your boundaries clearly and remember the goal isn't to control everything. It's to create systems where excellence survives when you're not in the room. I'll see you next time. So Abona. I see you. And I'm better for seeing you. I'm Jason Allan Scott.